Chapter 22. And again Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again he sent other servants, saying, Tell those who were invited, See, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, Bind him hand and foot, and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. The same day Sadducees came to him who say that there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, If a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. But Jesus answered them, You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, The son of David. He said to them, How is it then that David in the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, The Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right hand, until I put your enemies under your feet? If then David calls him Lord, how is he his son? And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions.
Matthew 22. But the Lord calmly pursued what he had to say to them, so in the opening of this chapter we have the parable of the marriage of the king's son, which predicts the gospel day which was about to dawn. There is no question, what think ye about this parable, for it travels beyond men's thoughts altogether. It is also distinguished from the other two parables by beginning, the kingdom of heaven is like, or, more literally, has become like. Men come under heaven's jurisdiction by the reception of the gospel invitation, when the breakdown is complete as figured in the other parables. We are now again going to hear something new, just as we did in chapter 13. In this parable, the king does not demand anything from anybody. He gives instead of demanding. He too has a son in whose honor he makes a marriage feast, sending forth his servants to call men in. How aptly the call sets forth the gospel message: I have prepared, all things are ready, come to the marriage. Prepared through the sacrifice of Christ. Ready, since his is a finished work. Hence it is not now go, work, but come, come. In the first place the invitation went to them that were bidden, a number of specially privileged folk. We see the fulfillment of this in the early chapters of Acts. For a short time, the gospel went out only to the Jew, but the mass of them made light of it, occupied with worldly gain, while some actively opposed, persecuting, and slaying some of the early messengers, as seen in the case of Stephen. This first stage ended with the destruction of Jerusalem, as foretold in verse 7. Then the invitation is widened out as we see in verses 9 and 10. In the parable of Luke 14 we find one servant, representing doubtless the Holy Spirit. Here many servants are in question, representing the human instruments that the Spirit may use. They go into the highways, bidding all, as many as they meet, whether bad or good. The Spirit can compel men to come in, as in Luke 14, the servants are instructed to invite any and all they run up against. Not all will respond, but by this means the feast will have its full complement of guests. The gospel preacher has not to embarrass himself with questions as to God's electing grace. He has simply to pass on the word to all he meets, gathering in all who respond, for God will touch the hearts of men. The second part of the parable, verses 11 to 14, shows that, as always when human service is referred to, what is unreal may enter and remain for a time. By not accepting the wedding garment, the man had declined to honor the king's son. When the king came in, he was detected and consigned to his true place in outer darkness. The divine presence will unmask all that is unreal and disentangle everything. We saw this in Matthew 13, and shall see it again in Matthew 25. That the Pharisees were now getting desperate is seen in the fact that they were driven to an alliance with the Herodians, whom they abominated. Their question as to the tribute was cleverly framed so as to bring him into disrepute with either Caesar or the populace. They began with what they intended to be flattery, but which was a sober statement of truth. He was true. He did teach the way of God in truth. He was wholly above regarding the person of men. Asking for the tribute money, he showed them that it was evidently Caesar's, for it had his image upon it. If Caesar's, it must be rendered to him, but then he set them in the presence of God. Were they rendering to God the things that were his? This great answer not only amazed them but also so smote their consciences that they went away. Jesus had stated a great principle of action applicable to all of us so long as we are under the jurisdiction of any kind of Caesar. We must render to Caesar all his rights, but the things that are God's are far higher and wider than all that is his. The question propounded by the Sadducees was cleverly designed with the twofold object of embarrassing Jesus and of ridiculing belief in resurrection, which to their minds only meant a restoration to life under ordinary conditions in this world. Doubtless they felt sure that in result Jesus would be discomfited and themselves confirmed in their unbelief. But the Lord's reply showed that resurrection introduces into another world where different conditions prevail, and he quoted Exodus 3 verse 6, as showing that in the days of Moses the patriarchs were living in that other world, though not yet raised from the dead. The fact that their spirits were there guaranteed that eventually they would be there in risen bodies. In those days, the priests were mainly of the Sadducee persuasion, and the Lord did not spare them in the directness of his rebuke. Ye do err, was his plain word, and he indicated the source of their error. They knew neither the scriptures, that they professed to expound, nor the power of the God, whom they professed to serve. This twofold error underlies all modern religious unbelief. First, the scriptures are frequently misquoted and always misunderstood. Second, in their minds God is so stripped of his power and glory that endless difficulties are created. Let his power be admitted and difficulties cease to exist. The Lord's answer astonished all who heard it. Evidently it was quite new to them, even to the Pharisees, who had never been able to silence the Sadducees like this. Hearing it, the Pharisees came together, and one of them put to the Lord his question about the law, raising a point that they had doubtless often discussed amongst themselves. He was thinking of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, but the Lord turned him to Deuteronomy 6 verse 5, and added Leviticus 19 verse 18. The demand of the law is summed up in one word: love. First, love to God; second, love to one's neighbor. When Paul tells us, love is the fulfilling of the law, Romans 13 verse 10, he is only stating in other words what Jesus said here, verse 40. The 3 parables had brought them face to face with the grace of the gospel. The 3 questions had been so answered as to impress upon them love, as the supreme demand of the law. To that love they were strangers. Yet being still gathered together, Jesus propounded to them his great question: what think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They knew he was to be the son of David, but why David should call him his Lord, in Psalm 110, they did not know. The only possible solution of that problem has been given in the first chapter of our Gospel. Jesus Christ, the son of David, is Emmanuel, which being interpreted is, God with us. If faith once seizes that, the whole position is as clear as sunlight. If that be refused, as with these poor Pharisees, all is gloom. They were in darkness. Not a word could they answer, and their discomfiture was so complete that they dared not question him more. However, though they were done with him, the Lord had not finished with them. The time had now come to unmask these hypocrites in the presence of the multitudes, who were under their influence.